Real quick before we get into the interview, one of the first exercises I run with executive teams is mapping their business portfolio to visualize the current work in progress and how it aligns to the overall business strategy. Now, without exception, every time I run this exercise, the gap between the current state and desired state is far wider than every executive believed, hoped, or even imagined. I've put the exact template to use, how I do this, and made it free for all of you to download by following the link in the comments. Go get your copy and let me know how it goes. Now back to the show. Welcome to the Unlearn podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Budd, a startup advisor, investor, and coach. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting Andy many years ago when I lived in London. We worked together with his agency, Clear Left, on a fantastic product at Channel 4, where we did the first adoption of AWS actually in the UK, for shows like Jamie Oliver's Great Cooking. The product launched, it was great fun and a great team to work with. Now, since then, Andy's gone on to sell his company, but also move into the venture world, where he spent a number of years working with and advising high-growth startups all over the world. He's captured all these lessons in a fantastic book called The Growth Equation, How Early-Stage Startups Can Build Powerful Engines for Growth. It's a fantastic read, lots of fun tips, and really a place to bring all of the knowledge into the world in this space into one book that founders can easily consume and start to put to work. So let's dive into a bit more about Andy's backstory and how he's got to do what he's doing today. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode and it greatly supports our podcast.
The very first seminal moment was me then discovering that the web was something you can build. I was sat in a cyber cafe in Indonesia in the kind of the late 90s. And back in the day, I was traveling around and, you'd go to a cyber cafe and you'd hotmail people. And everybody, and this put a panel of about 20 terminals were doing hotmail, apart from this one person next to me. And they had this like really weird screen. It was black and it had all these angle brackets and stuff. And I was like, what the hell is that? And as the person got up to leave, I kind of summoned up the courage and said, excuse me, what are you doing? And the guy said, oh, I'm making a website. This was before the term blog even existed. And I was like, you can make a website? Like I assumed it was only big companies that could do this. It was some kind of mystical thing. And they said, no, I'm making a website. I'm uploading all my pictures and then I don't have to email everybody. They can just follow me. And I just thought this is revolutionary. And so when I came back home after this big year and a half trip, I got a little cheap, Pentium, or is it 148, 146, something like that. And I sat in Waterstones or Borders Cafe and I read all these books and learned how to do web design back in the day. Back in the day, you did a bit of everything. You do the programming, you'd install the the CMS, you would deal with the visual design, etc., etc. And I kind of taught myself, back in kind of the late 90s, early noughties to be a web designer. So that was definitely the kind of the superhero origin story for me. I think in terms of how I got into VC, it's sort of somewhat similar. I've always been inspired by others. There was an agency that really inspired Clear Left back in the day called Adaptive Path. Adaptive Path were arguably the first UX agency in the world. And about 2 or 3 years later, I'd seen them doing all this amazing stuff and decided, well, we want to do that. And I looked around the UK and there was nobody doing that at the time. So I was like, well, let's make Clear Left the first ever UX agency in Europe or the UK. And so in 2005, we set up Clear Left. And one of the people at Adaptive Path was this guy called Jeff Veen. Tall, charming, really, really smart. I used to go to his talks at conferences and I always used to love them. He used to have this one talk, which I saw 5 or 6 times. And every time I saw it, I got a different thing out of it. And so he was always been my kind of spirit animal, my kind of secret sort of mentor. He doesn't know it, but I kind of became friends with him later in life. And, every now and again we'd go out for coffee and a meal and I'd kind of soak up everything that he did. He left Adaptive Path, started down the startup route. He started a font embedding company. About 2 weeks later, we started a font embedding company. His was Typekit, ours was Font Deck. And for about a year or two, I dabbled in the kind of the startup space. After that, he went and became a VC. And I thought this was the most kind of exotic thing ever. Like a designer becoming a VC. Normally it was kind of boring business grads, it was accountants, it was finance people. And here was this designer doing it. And then I started looking around, and a few of my other friends did that as well. There's a guy called Daniel Burker, and Jake Knapp, and John Zaransky. And these were all people that were designers that I admired, and they went into Google Ventures. There was Irene Au, who was the first designer at Google. She's amazing. And she's gone and become a VC at Khosla. And I started seeing this little trend of designers moving to VC. And so I think that moment of meeting Jeff Reed and seeing him make that move was the thing that made me realize, hey, this is something I could do as well. And so I kind of, after leaving ClearLeft, I followed that dream. That sounds a bit cheesy, but I followed that route. And lo and behold, I've been in the VC world for 4 years now.
Yeah, no, fascinating. It's funny. I just wrote a blog last week about that we're losing too many founders to finance, moving into this sort of colloquial path of like build something and end up in venture capital. So for you, it's really interesting to ask that question of what have you had to unlearn going from like leading a company, an agency, and then going into the world of venture capital and starting to actually look at other companies and both advising founders on how they can improve their product, but also, you have to sit on the finance side and actually decide, where are people's capital going to be deployed, right? It's a very different sort of mode of operation, right? Yeah, but I'm sure there's lots of skills that you learned in design that you moved over. So what were some of the things that have sort of surprised you that have helped you, or maybe some of the spots where you're like, wow, this was a bit of a space I really had to dig into and understand more about?
I mean, weirdly, I think you sort of alluded to it a little bit, is actually the world of running an agency and the world of working in VC actually isn't that different when you think about it. And I'll get to that in a second. I think the main thing I've had to unlearn in my career probably is moving from a practitioner to a leader, because you have to let things go. You have to realize that you're not the person that's delivering the thing, that you have to trust other people. You need to see control, and you need to have a different mindset. And so I guess I had my big sort of pivot, my big unlearning, maybe when I was sort of 4 or 5 years into my ClearLeft journey, when I realized that, I could have built a company that was around my own ego. I could have hired forwarding designers that were not as good a designer as me, and I could have put myself on a pedestal. But I've always wanted to be surrounded by amazing people. I've always wanted to be able to be surrounded by talent. And so I hired better designers, I hired better engineers, I hired better UX people, researchers. And so I find myself, like most leaders, running a team of people who were all much better than me. And so having to kind of learn to be humble, having to learn to realize that you are the least experienced, the least skilled person in the company actually takes quite a bit of time. I think a lot of ICs, a lot of individual contributors really struggle to make that transition. And actually, as well as working in the VC world, I do coaching of design and product leaders. And that's one of the biggest things I have to help them unlearn, is what got them to that position today isn't going to get them to where they need to go next. Being an amazing designer, amazing craftsperson has got them the opportunity to be a leader. But now they need to pack that all away because they're doing a fundamentally different job with a fundamentally different skill set. So I think for me, that was my big unlearning moment. Actually, I think all the skills I learned managing teams are the same skills that I deploy looking after founders, because I'm no longer in a position of power. I'm no longer able to tell people what to do. All I can do is help, I can advise, I can coach. And so that coaching mindset of going, like, do this or you'll be in trouble, is more like, hey, look, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I see a problem here. Let's discuss it. Let's try and sort it out. It's that whole, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I think if you're a dictatorial leader and you tell people what to do, you lose trust, you lose faith. And I think also, whether it's a managerial role or a VC role, there's a lot of big egos in VC. And I think a lot of founders expect to be sort of bossed around and bullied around. And so they actually find me, I'd like to think they find me a really nice person to work with, because I have opinions, but those opinions are, the hard one. They're opinions of an operator, someone that kind of has built and made stuff, rather than the opinions of just a business graduate. Not to say that business graduates don't know stuff, but I've learned through the School of Hard Knocks, etc. And I'm respectful that it's their company, it's their decisions. I can advise, I can guide, but I'm not going to dictate to them. And part of that comes from, the benefit of the way that, startup portfolios work. I mean, one of the things I have had to change, which is a really good thing, it's not that I had to change, but it's been a change, is when you're running your own business, the buck stops with you. And if something breaks, if something goes wrong and the rest of the team can't fix it, it's your responsibility, because ultimately it's your time you put in, it's your money, it's your equity, it's your future. And so there's a lot of stress around running a company. When you're looking after a portfolio of a dozen startups, you want every single one to succeed. But you also know that every single one won't succeed. If you're lucky, 3 or 4 will succeed. 3 or 4 will be okay, sort of sustainable businesses, but not deliver big results. And probably half of them will kind of disappear. And so having that comfort that I don't have to be responsible for every single one succeeding, that it's down to them, it's down to the market, it's down to a lot of things. And so I have a kind of a sort of a, not a hands-off approach, but I'm not bullish, I'm not a bully. I don't push people around because I'll help them as much as possible, but I can't guarantee that everything will be a success. And so that hands-off approach and that kind of accepting fate, I think, is a really, really nice attitude to come to. And I think people really appreciate that. I think the other thing, and I'll just finish off there, which is I think with a lot of VCs, they invest all their time in 2 or 3 companies they think will be a winner. And they often ignore all the other companies. And weirdly, I'm almost the opposite. Like, if the company's going to be a winner, it's probably going to be a winner without me. Like, they're already on a path where it's usually the other companies that are struggling a little bit that I help them most with. And so I built up a really great relationship with founders who know that, they can call me up anytime if they're having a hard time. I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to disappear. I'm not going to stop blocking their calls. I'm there for them. And so I really, really love that. And so it feels almost like my team, when I was an agency founder, like any day or night, whatever was going on, my team could talk to me and I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to, give them a hard time. I'm there to support them.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear you talk about some of these philosophies, I guess, that you have about helping teams and how you want to make your contribution, right? That first point as well, I always think it's a very interesting measure of a company is like, do you try to hire people that are better than yourself at parts of a company that you need to grow, right? Like that's as you say, it's an act of vulnerability and recognition to say, well, I may have started this, but that person's a better marketer than me, or I may have brought this from nothing, but I actually need someone who's great at doing another skill in the business. And I always think that's a huge mark for me when you meet people and the teams that they can sort of build around themselves, whether it's, as you say, within a company and you're a founder, right through to just the people you surround yourself with, whether that's mentorship or guiders or advisors. I think it's a great thing for anyone to be really, really considering about how to do that really well, and as you said, this other thing, which is probably, I think, one of the most important parts, is like if you have this ability for, whether it's your team, whether it's your portfolio companies, whether it's these folks that you're working with, feel that they can speak up, that's a huge superpower, because you're going to get the real information. You're not going to get what people want to hear or what they think the right thing to say is, or you can get to this truth seeking and real conversations. And for me, like, that again is the sort of secret to building great things, or recognizing something's not going to turn out as you might hope, is that the quality of the information that you get, and that's the sort of fascinating aspect of certainly what you're describing in portfolio companies, and looking across them and understanding how they're working. And if that's a hard thing to do. So what are some of the, your little techniques you may have learned to help create that sort of either relationship or partnership with these folks? Like, how do you start that? Because I think anyone can learn a lot from that, whether they're inside a company or outside a company or a startup or a portfolio.
I mean, I don't know. I think to some extent there's a lot of it is around how I was brought up and culture and living in the UK and all these kind of things. I do meet a lot of people who, are very focused on only making relationships with people that can get them somewhere. and they kind of hop on someone's shoulders and they get them to the next person, and then, when that person is no longer valuable to them, they don't interact with them anymore. And so it can be quite a ruthless thing. And I see that a lot with a lot of, business leaders, a lot of career kind of tech workers, is it's very, very focused on what do I need to do to get to the next space. I've never been like that. I've always wanted just to help people. And I think that's sort of the designer in me. I think a lot of designers are very empathetic. I think a lot of designers want to be helpful to people. And so you never know when you might need somebody's help. There's this kind of thing, which I don't know if it's actually true or not, but there's this kind of idea that, in some recruiting situations, particularly with executives, like they send a driver to pick you up, and the driver is actually in on the recruitment, and the driver will kind of like have a bit of a chit chat with you. And if the person is rude to you, that gets reported back, because there's this idea that like, hey, like if you're rude to the driver, if you're rude to the waiter, if you're rude to the person on reception, like that is showing a sense of your character. Whereas if you're nice and friendly to a person that you doesn't owe you anything, or you're not going to get anything out of them, then I think that's a true reflection. And so, yeah, I hate the idea in VC that some VCs, as soon as something goes south with a company, they're suddenly like not responding to your calls. It's all very Silicon Valley, because who knows what that person, I mean, again, I'm not saying this is why you do it, but who knows what that person might do? That person might go on and then join an amazing company. They might be able to, help you out in a situation in the future. Like, so I really believe in kind of, like helping people irrespective of the circumstances, because you never know. It's kind of neighborliness. Like, you want to help people out. And so I think that's just a characteristic that you're born with, or you is innate in you. In terms of how I approach and sort of help my founders, I mean, again, I just think being approachable, being friendly. I think because they know that I'm somebody that's like them, I'm always seen as a peer. I've got a few other colleagues who are, really, really brilliant people, but they are seen by the partners I work with more as the kind of the connectors, the money men, and everyone just sees me as just, oh, it's Andy, and they really value my opinion, but we just chat and we bond as friends. Very few people are friends with their accountant. But a lot of people can be sort of friends with their kind of, whatever it is, their local neighbor. And so I just have this kind of sort of neighborly approach. And it means that I kind of get information that, from people, I can really, and again, I think some of it is when I do coaching, it's like, I'm non-threatening. I'm not going to, kind of screw them over. They know I'm not going to screw them over. I'm there to help them. And so people open up, and that can be really, really helpful, because, a lot of the time, when you're in the VC world, people are really, really vocal when things are going well, and they tend to go quiet when things are going bad. The problem is when things are going bad, that's when they need you the most. That's when they need a helping hand. It's when they need a shoulder to cry on. So I want to be that person. I want to be that person when things are going bad. I'm the first one they think, oh, let's talk to Andy because he'll have some good advice. He'll make sense. Rather than them feeling scared, or I better not talk to my VCs because they'll be disappointed in me. Because that's the opportunity when you can turn things around. And this is the thing I really enjoy. Like, I've had so many instances in the VC world where a company's been on the borderline between sort of success and failure, and working with them over a couple of months, it's really kind of turned things around. It's turned their emotions around, their attitude around, their approach around. And so I think that's, for me, like the superpower that I have at SeedCamp. It's not making already successful companies even more successful because they can do it themselves. It's taking the companies that are having a bit of a wobble and helping them as much as possible to get back on track. And if these companies then become that huge success, then I've saved a company, and I've kind of solved a problem, and people are really appreciative. So yeah, that's my approach generally.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear that, because I think that's the hardest part for anyone is, I often think it feels like you're in a startup, you're often, one person, on your own, cheering yourself on for a long time. And, it's very easy to get behind when, the company is doing well and everyone pitch in and say, yeah, look, I'm helping row this boat that's already got a motor on the back of it, but it's those moments where, the momentum isn't there, where the teams have hit a wall, where there's a struggle, where, that's, I think, where it can be so important.
And I think just on that, I think the people I work best with, I work really well with sort of teams of founders, but the people that really, really appreciate me are often solo founders, or founders where their partner is very technical. So they've got a partner that is like a CTO and is really, really doing an amazing job at building, but they feel a little bit disconnected. And so they've got a person they can speak to and chat about. Because I've run a company before, I mean, this is the other thing, like I've not built massive startups, but I've run companies of like 30 or so people. So I understand the challenges when staff are maybe not happy or there's a problem going on. I understand the importance of culture. I understand a lot of the things that these people are struggling through. And so I can empathize, I can bond with them, and I can say, oh, well, when I had this situation, this is what I did, this worked, this failed, what are you thinking of doing? And so I think it's that combination of coaching, non-threatening, non-judgmental, and can be a real kind of co-pilot, you know. So I think that's how I work best with people. And yeah, having that kind of founder background is massively helpful.
Yeah, and you've always been someone who's given a lot back to the community through, your writing, hosting conferences for various communities, and bringing people together to share what they're learning. And you've done this again now in your new book, The Growth Equation, right? Which is a great, fantastic read. Highly recommend everybody goes out and checks it out. So share a little bit about what inspired you, first of all, to write this. And then we can talk about certainly the chapter I'm most interested around behavioral science. So let's dive off about what sort of inspired you to put this together.
Well, the first thing is, and people laugh when I say this, but I didn't actually mean to write a book. It was accidental. I'd been working with startup founders for about sort of 4 years now. I had all these ideas sort of rolling around my head around the challenges they were facing, the common problems. And I thought to myself, maybe I'll write an article. And the article longer. And I thought, well, maybe I'll turn this into like a multi, blog series. And they got longer and longer. I had about kind of 6 weeks, I think it was like January last year. And after about 6 weeks of writing, this thing turned into 15,000 words. I did a little Google.
That's a lot of.
I know. I was just writing really, really quickly. I did a little Google, what is the minimum size of a book? And it said 20,000. So I could probably do that. And then for the next 2 months, I carried on doing more writing. But it went 20, 30, 40. I think it ended up to being about 45 or 50,000 words, which is a really, really good book. But it was just trying to get this stuff out. And in a weird kind of way, it was quite selfish because I was using the writing, and I think this is a good thing. I think this is a thing that a lot of bloggers do. I'm sure you do it as well. Is by writing things down, by talking to people, it helps you solidify your own thoughts. And so prior to starting writing the book, when I was giving advice, I would give advice, but it was a little bit kind of not directionless, but it didn't have a coherent theme. It was the advice was there, but each time I gave it slightly differently. And sometimes I give it better, sometimes I give it worse. Now that I've written the book, I can reflect back on that's the bit where I talk about X concept. And so I'm much, much better as an advisor now and as a VC because I've got all these stories I can draw from. I've got all these examples. And so honestly, if I'd never even been able to publish the book, it would have already been a win because it really, really helped me coach and guide my founders. But what I've realized, and I do think, I would say this because it's my book, but I think it is a really good book. I think everyone I've passed it to who have been through the founder's journey have said, my God, Andy, this is the book I wish I'd read 2 or 3 years ago. This is a book I wish someone had handed to me at the start of my journey because everything in there I get and I understand. There's nothing, there's nothing new or revolutionary in the book. I should warn you. One of my friends said, Andy, what's the unique kind of insight that you've got in the book? And I was like, I can guarantee you there isn't a single unique insight in the book because all of this information is out there. But what I've done is I've gathered it into one place. So rather than spending 2 or 3 years trying to build up your own picture, rather than subscribing to dozens of newsletters, listening to hundreds of podcasts, reading thousands of articles, I've tried to kind of create a book that is just a one-stop shop, one of my reviewers said it's like having a pocket coach. Why go and spend thousands of pounds on an online course when you can just buy the book and within a couple of days you've got a framework for understanding growth? And the reason I want to do it is because there's so much confusion, there's so much misunderstanding, there are so many repeated problems that people have in this space that if me as a VC can, if it takes somebody 3 years to get to product market fit, and I can bring that down to 2 or 1.5, then suddenly like their chances of survival is much greater. The chance of raising funding is much greater. The chance of retaining staff and customers is much greater. And so I'm just trying to like reduce the cognitive load and the effort, because all of this stuff is kind of somewhat of a solved problem. I'll give you an example. Like what typically happens is a founder has a vision for some future product, and they spend the first 6 or 9 months kind of bringing that product to life. They launch it expecting that the floodgates will open and everyone will come rushing to buy the product. And that very rarely happens. Often it happens because they haven't even thought about building an audience. Audience is one of the 7 arguments of the growth equation, like building an audience. So, they launch and then no one's coming through. And so because these people are often product people, they think, well, how can I solve this problem? Well, it's obviously a problem with the product, so I'll add more features. More features, more features, more features. And every time they add a new feature, it doesn't really do anything. And so they add another one and add another one. And this, they call it the feature death spiral. Like you keep adding features. And at some point, hopefully, you realize just adding features isn't doing it. If you don't realize that, you keep adding features until you run out of money. Then your argument is like, oh, I ran out of money. It isn't you run out of money. It's because either, when it comes to product market fit, you've got a really great product, but you haven't connected the product with the right audience, with the right market. And so a big part of the book is like how you go about doing that. Like how, if adding features isn't the solution, because it really is, because features are great for your existing customers, but they're not great for people that have never used the product before. And if you're, most founders, like they really struggle to articulate what the product is and who it's for. And so they always go into, well, like our product's like X, but it has this feature and this feature and this feature. And if you're trying to sell a product on features alone, you've already lost, because you're trying to sell a vision, you're trying to sell a concept. And if you can't articulate that well, people, I don't buy a TV because of its features. I buy a TV because it got an amazing review, because someone says this is the best TV out there. And so trying to sell our features alone is a fool's errand. And so a lot of the book is around how you go from 0 to 1, how you post-launch, how you figure out how to position your product, how you get early users, how you make sure that they're finding value quickly, and how they stay there. Because this is the other thing, like if it's not a problem with like acquiring users, I see so many founders who get users in, they have the product, they kick around and then they leave. And the founder doesn't understand why. And so helping retain customers, get value quicker, all those kind of things. And these are all the things I would advise my founders. And what would usually happen, again, and I'll let you get a word in a second, but what would typically happen is I would give some advice to a founder and then ignore it. And then they carry on doing what they're doing. But then after a while, when things aren't working, they'll kind of reflect, oh, well, what about that thing Andy said? And they'll come back to it. And the way I liken it to is like if you've got kids and you tell them, don't touch the hot plate, you can keep telling them to not touch a hot plate. It's not until they burn themselves, they go, oh, ouch, I better go to mummy or daddy to get some comfort. And also, now I know that mummy and daddy aren't silly. I've learned a lesson there. And so ideally, like to some extent, you can't not convince founders to touch a hot plate. But when they touch a hot plate and burn themselves, hopefully they go, oh, I should talk to Andy. Because I remember Andy saying this exact thing would happen and I ignored him. And it's exactly happened exactly as he said. And now I want to go and talk to him because he might have some ideas around how we can get out of this mess. And so that's sort of really what the book is all about. It's like the common pitfalls to avoid and how to get out of them when you hit them.
Yeah, no, I love it, and it's, like I said, it's great coverage about, say, growing, attracting, positioning the product, and then retaining customers as well. It's funny, you remind me so much, our chief nobody at Nobody Studios, Mark, he always has this saying, what's the one feature that's going to pay for all the other features? And we need to get that one feature right. And, it comes up again and again and again. It's like trying to find the thing that's going to unlock, whether it's a channel, whether it's a audience, like all of these things are really fascinating, and we've built so many companies in the studio where we literally thought we had the equation solved, so to speak, to your term. And, I would say even 8 out of 10 when we even launch, we don't have it solved, and most of the actual magic is in that iteration of actually tweaking the dials and refocusing, who we're going after, how we present it to them, much less so than very rarely. I can't even actually think of one instance where we added 10 more features and someone went, yep, finally, that's the tipping point. Now we're going to start using your product. Now that you've got, sharing on Facebook installed, let's go do that.
And the feature thing also, it often indicates to me that people have got the wrong ICP, like ideal customer profile. People are often thinking about who the perfect customer will be. And that perfect customer is usually a big company with deep pockets. But that big company has a big checklist of things. They're like, we need to have SOC 2 compliance. And we need to have a really, really complicated, permission system. And we need to have all of these things. And so you add all these things, but then they won't buy because they're like, we need all these more things. And also, you were a 1-year-old company and we're a 10, 50-year-old company. And we actually ultimately feel really nervous working with you. And so I think a lot of this featureitis comes from having conversations where people tell you stuff. You believe it, you build it, and then they say, we need more. What you actually need to do is you need to find those smaller customers that are really, really frustrated with the current status quo, who are being underserved, that have that one thing that they really care about, that the company that they're using doesn't care about, has already said, we're never going to deliver that. And if you could deliver that one thing, you can build from there. And so a lot of it is about good customer discovery, good research, understanding the problem, not trying to boil the ocean, but to find the 1 or 2 or 3 unique things that you can give somebody that they're crying out for. I absolutely agree. But the other thing is, I come from a design background. A lot of the design mentality, I love designers. I think we should have more designers in the world. I think startups should work with more designers. But we often believe that by talking to people and doing research and building things up front, we can solve all these problems. And I don't believe we can. I think we have to launch and iterate. If you're trying to build a better CRM, then sure, you can probably brute force that.
Don't build another CRM.
I know, but if you're trying to build something that kind of hasn't existed before, you kind of have to get a rough thing out in public. And it's weird. It's crazy that we're 15 years on from the lean startup, and we're still debating whether MVPs or MLPs or whatever are valuable. But yes, the whole punch of the book around is also around what how to think about your early product, how to get to market quickly, all those kind of things. And I think designers can be really, really useful for then optimizing and improving and tweaking.
Right. Well, let's dive into this the chapter I'm most excited about. Right. So for listeners, one of the things I love actually is getting people to talk about the chapter they love about. But secretly, the chapter I really wanted to talk about was the one Andy picked. So I was even more doubly excited, which is the role of behavioral science in growth. And for me, this is I think one of the most fascinating areas of product development, company building. It just seems to be permeating so many things at the moment. And I just find it a fascinating topic. So just to begin, for people who maybe don't even know what behavioral science is, can you share a little bit about what it is? And then let's talk about how it's being applied in a growth context. Because again, I think this is a fascinating topic.
I'll demonstrate it with an example. So an example is economics. For many, many years, economists thought that we were rational actors, that we would make rational decisions about the future. So, we would realize that in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, when we're retiring, we need to have a big pension pot, and so we would save today. We would make rational decisions about our healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of world policy is designed around this idea that we're all rational actors. If you've ever met a person, I don't know if you have, I've met plenty of people, and they tend not to be very rational. In fact, we tend to make really quite unusual decisions. And so this idea of behavioral economics came about. This idea that rather than kind of sticking with this sort of rational worldview, let's look at how people actually behave and let's design around that. And so the classic example, the classic experiment is if you offer somebody £5 today or £10 in a month's time, the rational thing to do is to take the £10 because it's more money. It's twice as much money. Why wouldn't you wait? But pretty much everybody accepts the £5 now because we want instant gratification. We want to make sure we're going to get the money rather than have to kind of worry that it doesn't happen in the future. And that obviously affects things like pensions. We're much more likely when we get our money at the end of the month to spend it rather than save it. And so a lot of sort of behavioral science is understanding human decision making and understanding the irrational things that we do. And this feeds into a lot of other policy areas. Some of it is around kind of choice architecture. Like, how do you design the choices that people make in order to get an outcome that hopefully is better for them? The other classic example in choice architecture is this idea of donor cards. In the UK, it always used to be the case, I think it still is, that you had to opt in for donor cards. And so we've got a real lack of people who are donating their organs when they die, and people are dying unnecessarily. So there have been experiments with some countries, like when you get a driving license, for instance, rather than opting in for a donor card, you have to opt out. And I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say, for argument's sake, when you have an opt-in system, only 10% of people opt in. When you have an opt-out system, only 10% opt out. That is not necessarily telling people, what you want. That's telling you almost like that 10% of the people are lazy. So 90% of people are lazy and 10% aren't. And so by changing the choices, you can have a massive effect on outcomes. And so imagine that everything in the world. Imagine that when you design a menu. Imagine that when you design a pricing page. Imagine that when you design an onboarding flow. So I think a lot of founders often come from an engineering background. They're often seeing users as these rational, behavioral people. And they often design the first version of the product, which is really, really rational to the engineer, but doesn't use the right language that the users use, doesn't understand the kind of the mental state, the mental models that people are using to explore your product. And so it doesn't work. And so a big part of, I think, finding product market fit is by hiring designers and product managers that get human behavior and can explain, well, even if this is the most rational way of laying out the page, even if this is the most rational way of doing the flow, actually, if we use our understanding of human psychology, we can make it better. And so I think this is a big part of product-led growth. Product-led growth has been like one of the biggest kind of like trends in the last few years around how can we use our product and the way that we design the product to attract more users and to get more activity. And a big part of that is around choice architecture. It's around incremental improvement. It's around understanding the cognitive biases that the users have and designing in the grain of behavior rather than against the grain. And so that was why it was one of my favorite chapters to write. It's a really lightweight intro to all of the things around behavioral psychology. I mean, a big one is gamification. I mean, gamification was all the rage 10 years ago, and it's kind of it was used really poorly for many, many years. But you look at kind of like, language learning tools, and that they really, really heavily use the kind of elements of games that make it fun, that make it engaging, leaderboards and messaging and all this kind of stuff. And so it's about learning these techniques that you can deploy in an ethical way, that can make people really, really love using your product and make them coming back for more.
Yeah, no, I love it. Like, so my first startup was actually a mobile games development company. So this is what always sparked me the interest area in that. We built a game called Wireless Pets, and it was basically like a copy of sort of Tamagotchi. Yeah, where you would like keep this pet alive. And it was just when wireless application protocol became available, where your phones just got to connect with one another. And then it was mad. We launched this product. It was actually on the Orange network in the UK, and it just went bananas. We had something like 500,000 users within the first month, and it got our startup funded and off the ground. But so much of it was this sort of notion of people had to care for a thing. They had to feed it. So there was this sort of social responsibility that people started to feel towards this totally mythical, virtual, and not in essence real little animal that they had to feed, right? And so all of these things are really fascinating when we talked about cues to help people keep the thing alive, to keep engaging, if you will, in the game. Is like, your cat's hungry, your cat's thirsty. You haven't fed your cat in 4 hours, and people will be like, "Oh my gosh, that's not who I am. I want to feed this thing." So that was my sort of first sampler of it, and some of the companies we've experimented with too as well. One has been really fascinating about this idea of teaching financial literacy to kids, and there's always this sort of challenge, especially as people grow up, and parents want to give their kids agency or ownership of their financial management, but they also don't want kids ringing them up every month going, "Oh, I'm in college, I've spent all my beer money, I'm broke after a week, and your budget's meant to last you for 4." And really some of the interesting experiments we found is, if you were giving kids, or parents wanted to give their kids, they'd have their own current account, but they would also have another account called the family budget, or the family account. And if kids wanted to get extra money, they could withdraw from that account, but they wouldn't be asking their parents for money. They have to go to the family sort of pot and say, I want to take what's in that pot and attribute it to me, right? So again, these are sort of great examples where the parent isn't saying, yes, you can have more money or you don't have more money. They're saying, this is what's available to us as a family. So if you need to take more, you're going to have to perform the behavior of taking that and putting it into your account, right? So all of these sorts of things were really fascinating to me about raising awareness of what the impact of the behavior is, right? And it, surprise, surprise, instantly students got a lot better at sort of self-managing their own financial, outcomes and accountability and responsibility, because of a simple cue like saying, "Oh, if I take this, it's taking away from the group to me as an individual," which again challenges people's, as you say, ethics, their values, their what they believe is right, and ultimately to help them feel those moments to make decisions that are aligned to what they actually really want to do, rather than this sort of short-term, dopamine hit or fix, and it's so that I just think, as you say, this area to me is just like the most fun and fascinating part of product development, to be honest. And so I love seeing that in the book and like elevating that sort of conversation with folks as well.
I mean, that example, I think it's really good. It has two things. I think, first of all, what you're doing to some extent is you're adding a level of friction into the system, which slows things down. You're forcing people to think about the context of what they're doing and how it's going to affect people. Maybe it's not the family fund, maybe it's the holiday fund. And maybe you're trying to encourage your kid to say, hey, look, if we save up, we can go to Disneyland, Florida. But if we don't, we might have to go to Dismalland where Dismalland was in Margate or something. And so you're making the consequences understood and real. I think the other thing, which I think is really important about your example, is that the outcome of using behavioral sort of science is a positive benefit to the users. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to write the chapter in my book is because actually the past sort of 10 or 15 years, the most popular books around growth have been growth hacking. They've been often around using behavior as a weapon rather than a benefit. And there is a lot of ethical concerns around this behavior.
Absolutely.
In fact, my former colleague at Clear Left, Harry Brignall, has written a whole book around kind of what was originally called dark patterns, now deceptive patterns. And Harry's actually involved in legislation around the world, in the EU and the US, to ban some of these deceptive behaviors. Like, actually, we had President Joe Biden literally 2 or 3 days ago talking about how one of the projects that Harry was working on there's this quite common pattern where you sign up for a really, really cheap thing like a New York Times subscription for $1, and you sign up online. But when you want to cancel, they make it really difficult for you. Actually, you can't unsubscribe online. You have to phone up a number. And the number is really badly supported, so you have to wait and you try back and you get bored and you leave. When you get on there, rather than just saying, oh yeah, let me cancel it for you, they take you through this whole long emotional journey where you get frustrated. Like, do you not care about learning about the news? Like, asking all this manipulative stuff. And actually, New York Times, it's funny, New York Times have written articles against this practice and have also been called out for doing exactly the same thing. And so new legislation's coming in place, like Biden was saying it the other day, like the right to unsubscribe with the same ease as you subscribed. And so a thing like that could be a really good thing that product managers go, well, we're going to use these manipulative techniques to stop people from leaving, but you can't do that. And so a big part of my book is actually how can we look at growth, but in a more moral, more, reasonable and acceptable way. Like, I hate the idea of growth hacking. Hacking, to me, there's white hat and there's black hat and there's a lot of grey hat. But a lot of the worst instances of using behavior in growth has been to kind of make these addictive interfaces. The classic pull to refresh. A lot of people I know are kind of addicted to Instagram because every time they kind of scroll Instagram, they get a new update, they get a new dopamine hit. That's great for growth, but is it great for the user? Like, I love Netflix, but Reid Hoffman's saying their biggest competitor isn't another company, it's sleep. Like, what, just how bad is that? That, like, you're saying that you're trying to prevent people from sleeping, like normal sleep patterns. And so I think my big thing is with the book is like, we can make, products better. We can use behavioral psychology and behavioral science, but we have to do it in a moral and ethical way. And so this book is there's no hacking involved at all. It's all about doing growth the right way.
Love it. Well, as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. So it's good to hear you're bringing that in. Andy, look, it's been great to have you on the show. Great to hear, your own story and your own journey about why you're continuing to grow and evolve, and then the fact that you're still continuing to capture what you're learning and sharing back with the community. It's always a fantastic thing. So everybody, get out there, get yourself a copy of The Growth Equation. You will enjoy it. And thank you very much for coming and sharing with us on the show.
It's been lovely to be on and chatting. So yeah, if you go to thegrowthequation.info, you can get all the information you need, or just pop over to Amazon or your local bookstore. So yeah, I hope you enjoy reading the book. And yeah, been lovely chatting with you, Barry.
Right on.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episodes and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.